You haven't seen her, have you?
No, I haven't seen her. I only went out there once at night, at 2 o'clock in the morning.
That's Karen Sprague, talking about the legend of the Blue Lady.
We took the kids out there at 2 a.m. from the graduating classes, and we had a blue lady with a dress that was blue with lights in it and a blue wig with lights in it. And the first bunch of kids, they believed they'd seen the blue lady. The second bunch, I had 3 football players decided they was going to catch her and went running across the cemetery, climbed through the barbed wire fence, and grabbed our blue lady.
The story of the blue figure rumored to haunt the lonely cemetery of Kane, Wyoming, and the surrounding area seemed harmless enough at first, until Karen's search into local history started to hone in on the true story of a local family and what happened when the specter of something people still struggle with today ended in the kind of real-life horror that continues to make headlines now.
It's just a tragedy that happened. They were all young children.
On this episode of That Doesn't Happen Every Day, in which we interview everyday people about things that don't normally happen every day, we go to Northern Wyoming to hear the real story of the Cowboy State's fabled Blue Lady.
Well, everybody believes that the Blue Lady is Matilda Waters.
Quick caveat, sometimes when Karen is talking, you might hear the sound of people talking in the background. This is not an effect or something I've added to make the story seem more ghostly or creepy or anything. I genuinely accidentally picked up the sound of some people talking when I interviewed Karen, so my apologies to the audience and to Karen. Karen takes us to the site of the house where our story begins.
It was a 2-story beautiful home just down off of the hill before you get to the Kane town site.
Kane, Wyoming got its name from Riley Kane, an early settler and cowboy foreman in the area. By the 1960s, locals moved away as the newly formed Bighorn Lake began to cover most of the land. But back in the early 1900s, a man named Jim Waters moved with his family out to this lonely spot.
Jim had been married previously, and his wife died.
In listening to the story, it helps to remember that James had at least some children with his first wife. These kids were probably old enough that they were no longer living with Jim when he met his second wife in 1908.
And he married Matilda, and they had 7 children. And in 1920, the youngest daughter, who was 11 months old, died. And Matilda took it rather hard, and she probably had postpartum depression. Don't know now, but Jim sent her back to her folks, I believe in Ohio, to help her get well, and he had her come home. She seemed to be doing fine. And then one of the married daughters of Jim's came to visit Jim and Matilda, and the neighbors invited them over for a meal and an evening of cards. And Matilda had decided that she did not want to go.
Instead, Matilda stayed at home with her 6 remaining children.
She gave them all a bath, and then she popped them popcorn, and then she put them all in bed. And I just yesterday uncovered a newspaper article that said she tried to use a knife at first, and she couldn't get that to work, so she went and got a revolver and systematically went around and shot the kids.
A March 1921 article in the Casper Daily Tribune confirms what happened under the headline, "Rancher's Wife Kills Her Children, Takes Own Life."
Jim was at the neighbors, and him and his daughter and son-in-law were walking home. They heard the gunshots, and they ran to the house. The houses were fairly close. And he found all the doors locked. He couldn't get in the house. One article says he broke down a door and got in. Another one says Matilda come and unlocked the screen door and let him in, and he grabbed her in his arms, and then he could hear the kids crying and screaming. And he just dropped her, and she died then. So he went around and found all of the kids.
All 6 children were either dead or wounded.
I can't even imagine going through this when a doctor is approximately 7 miles away, and it's probably going to get him by horse. Anyway, One of the boys lasted one more day. Two of the children, Edith and Jim, the two oldest, they did not die. They survived their mother's rampage.
The Casper Daily Tribune pointed out that those two kids were just wounded by stray bullets, which makes the whole thing even stranger.
And Jim said after every kid, this was during a court hearing, that she would talk about suicide. She had a baby about every 2 years, and so whether that was the issue or what, like I said, she was pregnant at the time.
Eventually Jim Waters moved away, leaving his wife and his murdered children in a lonely spot by the Shoshone River known as the Kane Cemetery.
So the children are all buried out at the Kane, Iona Cemetery. They said they buried John Robert and Junior D., who were 6 and 4, in the same casket because they were both slight built and about the same size. But the rest of them apparently have their own caskets at the cemetery.
Some years after the tragedy, people began to see something in and near the cemetery.
And I have a classmate who swears that her mom was coming home late at night from Lovell, and this blue light floaty thing just floated off in front of their car, kind of just stayed in front of the car. And I had another friend tell me out at Crystal Creek, which is south of where the cemetery was at, that they had a blue flashing floaty thing come floating across in front of their car years ago. And the rumor is it's Matilda Waters, and she's searching for her children.
If you picture a windswept old western cemetery, that's what Kane Cemetery looks like.
So there are no homes out there. It's very abandoned, very, very lonesome.
Because the cemetery is so old and has experienced some past periods of neglect, some of the graves, not those of the Waters children or Matilda, are now unmarked. This has led Karen and some of her friends to do something sort of unusual.
We do grave dowsing when we go out there. It's based on the same thing as water dowsing. My husband has made me rods, and you bend it so you have got a 6-inch handle. You very, very slowly walk, and you do not grip these handles tight. You hold them very loosely. When you get right on top of the grave, the rods will cross in front of you. That's the basis for doing the grave dowsing, is to find graves that are unmarked. And I've had people say they go out there at night on purpose just to see if they can see the blue lady. I had a lady tell me yesterday that she has a friend that lived in a house on top of the hill, and she had a little girl that would walk out to the highway to get their mail out of the mailbox, and she had a little girl friend who went with her, and she played with this little girl. There was no little girl lived out there. And I said, well, it probably was one of the little girls that Matilda shot. I'm inclined to believe in spirits, but I don't know what it is.
The thing is, stories of mothers and fathers killing their own children and themselves are still making headlines over 100 years after this incident. I think Karen shares the most important aspect of this story.
History is important to reinforce. Maybe we cannot repeat the bad things and can repeat the good things. Things are better now. We have more resources. Well, now Matilda could have gotten help with whatever she was suffering from, because if she was threatening suicide before each child, now there probably wouldn't even have been any more babies till she was, healthy. I don't know, but I'm just fascinated by the history.
If you or someone you know needs help, anyone can call or text 988 or call 911. In closing, I wanted to recognize Ruth Waters, age 8, Junior Waters, age 6, Paul Waters, age 5, and John Waters, age 3. I want to thank Karen Sprague for being on the show today. Karen is the curator at the Lovell Kane Museum, which I've linked in the description if you'd like to visit. If you'd like to visit the cemetery and the story, it is open to the public. In fact, the Lovell Kane Museum would be happy to answer any questions and help you as you plan your visit. I just personally ask that you please be respectful to the cemetery and the people interred there. Shout out to KHOL for playing the show. If you'd like to hear more episodes of this podcast, do a search for That Doesn't Happen Every Day. Every day is 2 words in this case, podcast, and you can listen to every show I've done in the past for free. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to have a new episode to you in about 2 weeks.